So briefly touching on G2 and what the benefits of that product are and why we chose to stock that product as our primary sand. Big one is it's OSHA compliant with the new OSHA silica dust regulations. This sand is actually OSHA compliant because of how little dust you get when you pour it out. It's rain safe in 15 minutes, which we'll touch on more. It only requires one watering as long as you do it right. And then there's no haze, there's no dust, and no blower. We have an asterisk next to that because there's several spots in the process that if you have a blower, we're going to recommend that you use it, but it's not necessary that you blow it off.
So really we want to compare the two. So how does G2 Complete compare to other manufacturers' bag out there? Again, like Eric had said, it's OSHA compliant. Some of the other bags out there are really dusty, and that's where it's not going to meet OSHA compliant. On top of that, some of them are Portland based, but being Portland based gives it a hard joint, makes it water resistant, where G2 Complete is a flexible joint. As we all know, once that joint dries out, that sand will harden. It'll harden as hard as a rock, but as soon as a rainstorm comes through, it'll re-moisten and become flexible and soft, but it will not accept any more water. And then on top of that is the water resistant compared to where it'll become flexible again. Here's a quick little video.
Hi, Jeff Cunningham here with Alliance. I'm at one of Unilock's facilities, and today we're going to be showcasing the G2 Gator Max polymeric sand and how to install it with all of Unilock's products using the appropriate tools and procedures to complete a successful installation. So getting a little closer in on here, you can see that the bedding material we constructed is an open graded material, totally free of fines, great for allowing water to transfer through your profile, giving it a frost-free base. Also, we want to squash any disbelief that polymeric sand isn't compatible with it, which we will show you today that it is compatible with open graded material. All right, so some of the environmental conditions or site conditions you absolutely must have during a Polysand install is dry pavers or slabs. So we got a ton of rain last night, overnight, and one great field test to check is to look at the side profiles of the pavers that they're not wet, because that would hold up the polymeric sand from being able to flow down into the joint properly. Another great benefit that we talked about earlier, using an open graded material that is allowing water to get right through that profile, allowing you to do a Polysand install all that much sooner.
So just a couple key points from that video. This sand will work with standard base material and your open graded aggregate. So no matter what you're using for your material, this is going to work. And the key thing that he talked about in there is check for moisture, not just moisture looking at the surface of the pavers and yep, looks dry, everything looks okay. Do that field test, pull that paver up and look at the side, because the moisture on the side of that paver is going to have an impact. And as we talk about sand settling and what happens through the process, that's going to have a major impact and really cause potential problems for you if there's moisture still on the side of that paver or in the aggregate base.
So not a bad idea to grab that leaf blower at this point before you pre-compact your pavers. Just clear the whole area of the debris. Construction sites are dirty, messy places, and you don't want to grind that stuff into the surface of the pavers. So we're going to get right into our pre-compaction, setting the pavers, these Beacon Hill slabs, into place. And we're going to feature this really cool machine, the Weber roller compactor. This one's the VPR 700 in particular. All right, so we've done our pre-compaction already, leveling out these pavers. I'm just running my hand across the surface, and there's not really an area that I'm catching on here, so it's really important for a proper installation. ICPI recommends that.
So what we have here is make sure you clean the paver surface off, but also always compact the pavers first before you put in the sweeping sand. That's the best practice. That's how it should be done. And then after you've set those pavers, either in that 2NS bedding sand or your chipped stone, then you start sweeping those in. And then it's easier for you guys to adjust. If you might crack a paver, well, if there's no sand in that joint, it's a lot easier to pull that paver out and put in a proper or a new one. So kind of do these steps, and we're just going to continue through this process.
We are going to open this bag of G2 Gator Max. With the rapid set technology, this polymeric sand is going to set up in 15 minutes. Very important. I think there's some myth within the industry whether to spread or just dump one pile. Definitely best practice to spread over the area. And why we do that is we don't want the finest part of the polymeric sand to fall into the joints first and be left with the larger granules at the end of your sweeping. So what Jason is doing here is the proper way to spread a bag out over the project. This polymeric sand is good for traditional base, open graded materials, overlays, when you have a non-drainage base, ultra base perhaps, or even just a solid concrete subdeck that's below your pavers, natural stone, slabs. I just want to highlight how clean G2 actually is to work with. When we brought this sand out to the market, our big standalone feature with this is that it is virtually dust-free. So you saw it when it was being dumped out. Jason was dumping the bag of sand out. There was almost no dust whatsoever. It's so clean that if you're using a fine bristle broom like these guys are using, you can almost get away with not using a blower, but it depends on textured surfaces and, you know, the products that you're working with.
So like they said, you want to make sure you're not dumping the sand. We see a lot of times on a job site when guys are getting into this process and they're just dumping the bag out, and sometimes they're dumping it from pretty high, and with a lot of other sands you're getting a cloudy, dusty mess going on. You won't get that with this, but what you don't want is as you're pouring, you're losing polymers and things are spreading out, so nice low spread of the sand. Like I said, it's dust-free, and then the soft bristle broom, that's really a best practice when you're sweeping it in, because like you mentioned in the video, when you sweep it with that soft bristle broom, it gets down into the grooves of your pavers, in your joints, and that's going to almost set the sand to the right height that you need without having to go back over it with a blower. If you use a firm, stiff bristle broom, it doesn't quite sweep as well.
We swept all of the polymeric sand off the top of the Beacon Hill. Really important to do that so you're not grinding the polymeric sand into the surface, scratching the surface, and vitally important when using textured products. We're now going to add some more to fill up those joints. Again, spreading it over the entire surface. And you can see there's virtually no dust with this G2. It's pretty incredible. Notice how these joints here, the sand is actually about 1/8 of an inch below the top of the chamfer, not 1/8 of an inch below the top of the paver. It's really important not to overfill the joints.
So some of the key points there is you know, use a blower, clean it off before you run that compactor over that so you're not embedding some of those polymers into the paver. Understand that sand is going to consolidate probably 30 to 50%, especially on very small joints. So the sand needs to be compacted. If you guys are just sweeping that in and showering it in, there's going to be air pockets in there, and that air is going to actually work its way out, and then you'll actually see that sand actually bubble. And when it bubbles, it can bubble well above that chamfered edge. And that's another reason why we're saying keep it an 1/8 inch below the chamfer, not an 1/8 inch from the top of the paver down, because with this being a flexible sand, when it re-moistens, it kind of swells up. Well, on a joint like this, if you keep it 1/8 inch below, it won't swell up above the paver surface itself. And also possibly use a blower to help set that sand. So if that soft bristle broom isn't doing it for you, you can go through with the blower lightly and kind of blow out some of that extra sand that if it's too high in the joint.
So for me, this is one of my biggest takeaways from the whole sand piece we're talking about. There's different pavers, different products, different edge profiles. Where is the proper depth for that sand? I think this picture shows it great because you've got a chamfered paver and you've got a square edge paver. And it shows those sands are actually different depths because they both need to be an 1/8 inch down from a certain spot. 1/8 inch down from the surface if there's no chamfer, 1/8 inch down from the end of the chamfer into the joint if it's a chamfered paver.
So at this point it would be typical to blow off the pavers, but with G2 it's so clean you don't even have to use a blower at this stage. Maybe with some textured pavers this could come in handy, but we're ready to activate this polymeric sand now with some water. Don't wait for the rain to activate your polymeric sand. Don't just stick your thumb on the end of a garden hose. Get yourself the proper nozzle to activate the polymeric sand. So shower setting with G2, it's super important now with the rapid set technology. It's got to be set on a shower, not a mist. Mist was the way we used to do it in the olden days. Now with G2, you're really going to saturate these joints. Little soaps and suds that you see there, not to worry whatsoever. A lot of people think that might be the polymers that are leaving. It's actually called a surfactant. So what it is, it's an unhydrated soap within polymeric sands. It's a vehicle to allow water to move to the top of the joint, making the top of the joint the strongest part.
So I hope you guys all understand that. So, you know, in the past, it used to be you'd mist, you'd watch that absorb into the sand joint, then you'd come back, you'd mist it again, and you'd probably do that about 3 times. This is shower, penetrate as much water as you can in that joint for 30 seconds and 30 square feet. So you are literally pumping a lot of water in there. And that surfactant that everyone sees, it's a very misconception. Everyone thinks that's haze. That is not haze. So it is that dehydrated soap he's talking about that's allowing that water to pass through that joint and bring the polymers to the top of that joint. Without that, you guys got to understand, as soon as that water hits that sand, it's already activating. It's already trying to lock up. So definitely make sure that you guys are putting as much water in that joint as you can with the shower head and keeping that in mind. 30 seconds for 30 square feet. Also, make sure you're starting at the lowest end of your patio and you're working your way up. You wouldn't want to start at the top and then start showering it and you get water residue that's going to start activating your stand, and by the time you're done, it will already be activated and you won't be able to do anything with it. So,
at 0 degrees Celsius or 32 degrees Fahrenheit and above, this polymeric sand will start its activation. It'll be rain safe after 15 minutes. It's not necessary to blow off the residual water, but if you have it and you want to use it, feel free. Just be mindful not to disturb the sand in the joint and blow it out of the joint onto the surface. So this brand new version of G2 with rapid set technology will set up in 15 minutes. What you're going to find after it starts to set is it's intact, it's a little bit rubbery, but over time it's going to become quite rigid yet flexible in the environment.
So inevitably, I'll get a call every spring, every fall regarding sand, that the sand didn't set up. We just did the job recently. We followed the instructions exactly perfectly, and it's not set up. It's soft. The thing to remember is this is going to set up within 15 minutes. It's rain safe. 15 minutes it'll start to set up, as long as it's warmer than 32 degrees. But if it's not warm and dry, that joint isn't going to dry out. It's going to stay moist. It's going to stay rubbery. So keep that in mind when you're installing it, and know that if you install it early on when it's still kind of wet out, and maybe it was safe that day and safe the next day and that week was great, but we've still got moisture coming in and spring showers and all that kind of stuff, when it gets wet, it's going to soften. When you get into the hot months of the year, that's when it's going to dry out and harden back up.
and I think the biggest point there is I'll have contractors call and say, hey, Chris, it was 40 degrees when I installed it. Well, I get that, but your joint, like Eric was saying, is not going to dry out within 24. It should be maybe 24 to 48 hours before that joint will fully dry out. So that night, the temperatures drop below 32 degrees. Now all of a sudden you have that freezing, and now it's going to affect that sand. So what we have here is, we see this all the time with quartz stone. Again, it's swept very high. What we really want to zoom in here is when it's swept so high and you're not below, of course, quartz stone doesn't really have a chamfer, but we want to make sure we're below that and the sand's not on top of that paver, because as the ground moves, it's just going to flake that and you'll be able to pull that away.
So the previous slide was what you shouldn't do. This slide is what you should do. This is what you should have. And it might be tough to see from a distance, but on these pavers, you can actually see the top edge and part of that flat side of the pieces of quartz stone. This product's designed to replicate natural cobble street stones. And so when you set the sand in there, you want that sand lower so it's like the cobblestones popping up out of the earth. That's what it should look like. And all too often we see, like Chris said, that sand's just way too high. Number one, your sand is most likely going to fail. And number two, you're not really achieving the look that this product was designed to achieve. So keep that in mind.
And one thing with that is kind of my recommendation is with Beacon Hills and stuff, we sweep it in, we compact it, and then we do the resweep. With quartz stone, I kind of sweep it one time. Once I vibrate over that, it kind of sets the sand at the right level for me. So it really simplifies that, because already when you try and sweep sand into quartz stone, it's very difficult. But one thing that we really want to show here is with that quartz stone product, for a vehicular application or even a pedestrian application, I'm recommending that you use Eurostone. Eurostone is designed for a cobblestone paver up to 1.5 inches. What this sand will do is it's very durable, it's water resistant. So once you shower it in, it's going to be hard. It's going to be like the sands that we are very used to, the old polymeric sands. But because of that, you guys need to understand that when you open this bag, it's going to be dirty. So if you've been using G2 Complete for the last year, now all of a sudden you're going, whoa, this is way dirty. But it's going to achieve that, and it's going to really help, because with G2 Complete on these larger joints, when it gets wet and it kind of swells, it can create some issues. So I have a project in Lansing where there's like a water geyser, I don't know, but this patio stays wet year-round. Well, when it stays wet year-round, and then they have a dog that comes out, it literally will tear that polymeric sand up. So on these larger joints, town hall, use Eurostone.
So the number one takeaway from this whole Polysand piece, the most important thing is read the bag and follow the instructions. I know that sounds basic, it sounds so elementary. I'm guilty, and I know a lot of people, other people here are guilty of it too. My wife tells me all the time, like, you'll just jump in and say, I can figure this out. And a lot of times I can, but you don't want to just jump in and try and figure it out and then find out I did it wrong, and then you're blowing the sand out of the joints and going back and trying to fix it. Make sure whoever's installing it understands, because these two products, as Chris said, same manufacturer. They both come from Polybind. But the installation practice and process is very different. And that's going to be true not only within a brand, but manufacturer to manufacturer. If you're using a different sand, just make sure the guy that's doing it understands the process from sweeping to watering, the whole process from start to finish, so that you don't have any problems on what should be your final step and get off the job.